Hey Erin, what's up?
Hey, glad to be here.
Where are you calling in from? I know you've been traveling a lot in the past couple months.
Yeah, right now I'm up at the mountain retreat in Breckenridge, Colorado, post ETH Denver.
How was your ETH Denver experience?
It was really great. It was awesome to have a good number of the core team from ETHChicago there, as well as I spent most of my time at the DSI events, and really connect with that community in person is always great, and to see some of the momentum really gaining in the DSI ecosystem is super exciting.
Kind of blew my mind that the whole core team were ETH Denver virgins. We all
Yeah,
did our thing for the first time. But yeah,
yeah, we all got to experience it together and kind of dive into each of our own corners of Web3 and then bring those connections back to Midwest, which is exciting.
super so. And I'm back in the Midwest, ready to spread the gospel out here in Chicago at Drive Cap. Ready to dive in about your experiences at Vitalia, startup city concept. That's a new and exciting thing to kind of spread the word about. I think a lot of people are curious about it. And you were there for a couple months, so why don't we just dive right into it? Tell us how you found out about it, what drove you to register for it, and yeah, what your experience was there.
Definitely. So I guess just backing up for anyone who might not be familiar with Vitalia, it's a startup society kind of connected to the larger umbrella of network states, which was made popular by Balaji. And really just this idea that our physical location or the country through which we were born into or reside in doesn't need to be the dictator of kind of the societies that we participate in as we move into future environments that allow for a much more globally connected ecosystem that isn't just tied to your geographic domain at that given moment. And this really allows for flexibility of new economic jurisdictions to pop up and be able to support some of these different cities or states that want to exist in this type of way. And so Vitalia is a startup city that is located in Prospera, which is a special economic zone or jurisdiction in Honduras. And one way to kind of understand that is similar to how indigenous reservations in the United States have some different, maybe regulatory aspects or properties to their zone or region, but still are able to benefit from some of the larger benefits of being located in the U.S., such as military protection. These different special economic zones kind of have some similar properties, and that's what Prospera is. A few that are particularly interesting to a lot of Vitalia residents are just more flexibility on biotech regulatory side, allowing for more experimentation at earlier stages in that scientific discovery process, as well as better kind of taxes from that business and personal side. So when people are building out these different companies, will really be able to put some of their different funds to good use and really have bigger impact through just kind of some of those different aspects that these zones allow for. Vitalia, their primary focus is on longevity and making death optional. So really kind of heavy leaning into that biotech side, and also having startups, founders, builders really be located there and support them in taking those next steps forward at the entire infrastructure build out layer for really creating sustainable and vibrant and thriving ecosystems in some of these new zones.
A few things I want to dive into there that you touched on. So one, this idea of longevity research making death optional, and also, this concept of a startup city, especially in places, offshore. I think some people outside of crypto and really just, you know, we'll look at these and say, oh, this is just a way for, people with money to go and have fun on a beach and not have to pay taxes, right? So like, what are some of the benefits to these local communities that the startup city concept can bring, that Vitalia may have brought? And then we can talk about some of the longevity stuff.
Definitely. So Vitalia Startup City is located in Prospera Special Economic Zone, which is located on Roatan, which is an island part of Honduras. And Roatan has 2 million tourists visiting it every single year. But those tourists are constantly cycling through. So in terms of like actual like proper infrastructure build out, or even like having good roads or different just things that we might take as common or take for granted in the US or other Western countries. Having cities that really kind of plant their flag in the ground there is able to contribute to the build out of some of this infrastructure, which benefits the entire community there. Additionally, Vitalia and Prospera, they're constantly doing work with the local community there, and like most, if not all, of the Prospera leaders are all from Honduras. So they're really creating this new zone as a way to make Honduras overall better and just bring more opportunities to where they're from. So there sometimes is different conversation of, oh, this is just this extractive type of modern day kind of experience, and I would say it's a lot more sustainable and actually beneficial for the local ecosystem than it is just going there for a week and being a pure tourist and just kind of extracting from the different beaches, or adding more environmental kind of toxins into the environment there. Whereas if it's seen as a home, which it is for many Vitalian residents, it is also treated as a home and treated in a way through which that entire island, as well as extended to Honduras at large. There are some different trips kind of going over to the mainland. That's part of the whole equation, and people take care of their homes.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk more about your specific experience there and some of the things that you saw when we were talking about longevity. I think, you've told me in the past that there's sort of two approaches to longevity, one that may interest you more than the other. One is the idea of prolonging life, as in just making, basically people who are healthy, enabling them to live longer lives. Maybe we'll call that the Brian Johnson approach. But there's also like the improving the quality of life for people, in the prime of their current years. And I think maybe that interests you more. What was your experience like at Vitalia with regards to what were people more interested in? What kind of cool stuff did you do with that space?
Yeah, so Vitalia is really focused on this longevity, and what you were alluding to is this conversation about health span versus lifespan. And that's definitely a debate within the longevity space. But ultimately, pursuing and advancing research on cellular aging and degeneration, like aging as a whole, is beneficial to almost every other disease state, because most diseases that might affect any of us at younger ages, not necessarily just at those latter years, is due to cells rapidly degenerating or aging in these kind of weird or mutated types of ways. And by doing research on what that looks like at the full extent can actually provide clarity, or at least kind of more of a foundation for a lot of these other conditions, which sometimes gets lost in some of the narrative about longevity, but it's very much a key part of the conversation, um, that I definitely care about as well. Just how can this extend to maybe more underserved populations of people, or people who really need it now, instead of just those who are privileged enough to think about extending one's life and do so in kind of a positive mindset type of way, which is a privileged perspective to have.
Definitely. So what were some of like the cool projects, experiments that, you guys did down there in the 2 months that, got you excited? Maybe something that is going to keep going after Vitalia.
Yeah, one organization that kind of convened or started forming down at Vitalia was the Biohacker DAO, and that's really focused on looking at a bunch of these different biometrics to understand how different changes in your lifestyle, maybe different supplements or medications that you might be taking, is affecting your body, and doing so in a pretty rigorous way for a good number of people. And just making sure that all that data individual people are collecting is able to be standardized in a way that it can contribute to a larger knowledge base. And tying it back to ETH Denver and just broader DeSci conversations right now, standardization and coordination has been a very, very kind of large theme throughout both my experience at Vitalia and then more broadly in DeSci, and even extended to Web3 combos as well. I feel like that kept coming up. So Biohacker DAO is one organization that really kind of formed out of Vitalia. And while there, participated in a couple different experiments, one being a CGM, or continuous glucose monitor, which you just kind of stick into the back of your arm, and it's able to measure your glucose spikes as you kind of just exist throughout the day. And we had, I think, 26 people have that in for 2 weeks, and we're able to just share results. And that idea of being able to be in one place, run these different experiments, and then share different interesting findings each one of us might have experienced with it, or questions we might have had as well. It was really beneficial both at a personal level as well as kind of a collective group perspective. There were a handful of other people experimenting on different kind of biohacking type things, a lab focused on cybernetics and implantables, which they'll be moving their main base down to Vitalia. And then a lot of different founders and companies, especially focused on stem cell therapeutics, and really exploring at the full extent what could it look like to really properly address and or maybe cure some different diseases.
So you say, when you say, like start a lab in the Caribbean, that sounds, I think from a traditional science perspective, that might scare some people and thinking like, oh, like what sort of scientific rigor are they using here? Like, is this actually like good data that they're generating? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Like how much of a trust factor is there with the community, with being able to bring these results back to, the traditional science community, in more like developed nations?
Absolutely. So there's a review board down there, and it's part of the GARM clinic. And so for any different proper clinical trials, it has the ability to go through this review board process. And that's really the main standard in science for proposing different clinical trials and making sure those are done in a proper and ethical type of way, and that the experimental design of it is done so in a way that is proper science, rather than kind of just being able to maybe fabricate some of the different findings, which is a huge problem across science broadly, just the reproducibility crisis, where the majority of science isn't actually reproducible. So what we're naming as scientific truth throughout society may not actually be truth, because we are incentivizing and just there are incentive mechanisms in place for reproducing something that may already have been found. And that's a big problem that hopefully DeSci will be addressing broadly as well. Tying it back to Vitalia and Prospera, being able to really propose and create these different clinical trials, and then pairing that into this whole framework of decentralization can allow for those clinical trials to then capture data and coordinate with different labs and people located all around the world, which will allow for a much more robust data set coming into some of this different research rather than it being like, oh, we're only going to study people of this one particular demographic, which usually doesn't effectively extend to other communities that aren't as researched. So having some more of this flexibility tied with mental constructs and social constructs of decentralization, as well as those technological kind of infrastructure railways, could really benefit a lot of underserved populations from a general health perspective across the globe.
That makes sense. It's super fascinating. I think distrust of traditional institutions is at an all-time high. I mean, especially post-COVID, we had a lot of people questioning the efficacy and the safety of COVID vaccines. So it seems like the moment is ripe for alternative approaches. Lots more I want to talk about on the DeSci side of things because you're so passionate about it and you're so deeply plugged into it. But I do want to give some space towards some of the other things that were going on at Vitalia. I know there was a startup city conference. There was an AI conference. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, so almost every other week there was a conference that really attracted in some other leaders in the space down to just kind of convene with people properly living out what these startup societies or kind of that broader umbrella of network states rather than just the theory of it. And so it's cool to be able to kind of have that convening of different folks. The first conference was focused on longevity with more of kind of like a biotech stem cell therapeutics focus. Um, and then the other conferences were focused on crypto and kind of network states. Next one was AI and tech optimism and progress. And then the last one was longevity again, but with a bit more of kind of like a biohacking or kind of more on that health span side of the equation and other things we can really be doing now. Um, and it did a great job of attracting some of those different leaders into the space and also just sparking the ability for the people there, who is a very self-selected group of people, to be able to convene and connect in meaningful ways, and different co-founder and other collaboration opportunities spun out of it. So it's quite effective in actually sparking kind of those baseline foundations for proper startup and build out of different projects moving forward.
That's awesome. And you mentioned notable speakers. I mean, I was a little starstruck seeing some of the lineups. You had Biology there, and of course the aforementioned Brian Johnson. Any favorites of you? Anybody who you really think stood out?
Yeah, I really enjoyed Naval's talk. I felt it was super applicable to a lot of us there, just as we continue building out in the world, and tying in a philosophical element into the conversation, which that ethics, and just coordination overall is so important to all of these conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And then some of these talks are going to be released by Vitalia as recordings, right? People can go out there and check them out.
Yeah, a good number of them are already posted on the Vitalia YouTube or the Vitalia Twitter or X account.
Awesome. Make sure to post that in the description. Cool. So moving on to like just more non-conference, non-work. I know you were just overwhelmed with papers to write, podcasts to do, things to see. But what were some of the things you enjoyed being down there? I mean, after all, you were down on an island off Central America. What kind of fun stuff were you able to do?
Yeah. one benefit of these different startup cities is the ability to convene different resources and just the ease of being able to connect with other like-minded people, as well as have access to some of that intellectual stimulation. And the type of people who show up to these things are usually quite human-centric. So we have this really great balance of this deep tech or scientific expertise paired with this human connected element, which is super, super important to balance, especially when we're thinking about adoption of crypto and blockchain and Web3 and AI and all these different emerging technologies. And so that was one piece I really enjoyed. Another piece was just the warm environment there and being able to watch the sunset each night with 20 or 30 other people who are becoming like close friends, and your kind of whole community there, or being able to wake up and jump off the dock and go swimming, and this really great balance between natural environments, this kind of startup, and really kind of focus on building, creating things, impact tied into that, and connection, as well as taking care of oneself at a personal level with the sauna that was built out, or cold plunges, and the gym available. And yeah, it was overall a really great experience for those of us who might have the flexibility or interest to kind of connect with other people in that type of way on these shared topics.
So on the subject of flexibility, how are the demographics? Did it mostly skew younger people? Would boomers such as myself, would there be something there for me? Yeah, talking about more just the representation.
Yeah, most people were probably somewhere between 25 and 45. There were a few people like in their 60s, especially those who have done a fair amount of work in longevity for decades by now, or people who have like been a leader in some of these different conversations about aligning economic and financial incentives when creating new, more sustainable structures. And so being able to learn from different people who have been doing this work for decades, mixed with some of us who might be a little bit earlier in our careers, to actually do some of that build out and keep pushing it forward, was a really kind of great balance that I think DeSci and the Web3 space can continue doing a better job of just learning from the people who have pushed forward open science and open source movements in the past, or who have maybe built up an entirely new governance structure due to maybe a civil war within their country. Like there's so many different things that we could be learning from these other spaces and people who have just done this work already, that I think we'll see more integration with throughout Web3 broadly. And so that's kind of one aspect of demographics. Overall, there was a fairly good like representation of people with ties all around the globe. One limiting factor, though, was some countries, especially in Asia, don't have ties to Honduras. So some people from those countries tried to come to Honduras, but since there wasn't a proper visa system set up, they were stuck at the border and they weren't able to come in, which is just kind of part of this conversation as well, especially as some of these different jurisdictions might be recognized by different countries moving forward. What does this flow look like, and how can there be better coordination or recognition and just access or streamlining connection between people located all over the globe?
For sure, yeah. I feel like so much of this coordination tends to happen online because of that, because there are no barriers like that. We have physical barriers around nation states and stuff. So I guess moving out of the space, moving out of Vitalia, how do you feel that Vitalia propelled like the DeSci narrative for you, and both at large? What are some of the things that you're working on now, and what are you excited about?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I found out about Vitalia through it being posted in some different decentralized science or DeSci Telegram group chats. And due to its focus on longevity build out and biotech, really has a lot of alignment with what DeSci is building towards as well. Obviously, DeSci can look like a lot of other things beyond kind of maybe that decentralized clinical trial aspect, or some of the different things that Vitalia is focused on. DeSci can also look like pure data technical infrastructure or education and community building with different scientists at conferences or the universities that they're located at. So DeSci and Vitalia are very much connected, but both extend beyond just the scope of their counterpart.
For sure. So with regards to you, what specific projects did you maybe start there that you're going to continue to work on, or maybe that you were already working on that Vitalia helped you move along?
Yeah, so at Vitalia, I was able to connect with some different people I've known before in DeSci or Web3, as well as make lots of incredible new connections. And one of the people I was able to reconnect with there is Roatan. He is the leader and founder of DeSci London, which is the largest in-person DeSci community throughout the entire globe. And while there, we were talking about the kind of just opportunity and need for a DeSci fellowship program. So we kind of explored if just our different ideas on that and if there was alignment, and we found that there was. So we're currently working on spinning up the first cohort of Muse Matrix, which is a 6-month-long DeSci fellowship program, really focused on introducing Web3 technologists to the opportunities or the challenges in science, and scientists or medical providers to the opportunities that different emerging technologies like ZK, AI, blockchain broadly can have to solve some of the challenges they might be experiencing, and then connecting these groups together, cross-pollinating ideas. And that's really the first 2 months, some of that educational piece, introducing them to what's happening in DeSci already and kind of different opportunities DeSci could address. And then the latter 4 months is focused on actual project or product build out that we'll be helping to facilitate in connection to many of our partners.
That sounds super exciting. So what does Muse Matrix and maybe the DeSci ecosystem at large need most right now? Is it funding, talent, getting normies involved just by being sexy in some way? Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so within DeSci, different organizations are taking different approaches, and through things like the DeSci Summit and a bunch of us convening around ETH Denver, we're able to more effectively coordinate. So yes, to everything you said, more funding can help propel some of these projects forward. Getting more people who are passionate about some of these different areas involved will really make sure that the impact and what those proposed solutions are actually addressing the needs of the people they're supposed to be addressing. Technical infrastructure is also a super important part of this conversation. The biggest being pursued right now in the DeSci ecosystem focused on data collection, management, analysis, all of that. And then the other half being publications, which is also tied to identity and some different security conversations. And then just kind of broad community awareness and onboarding of scientists and developers in particular into this space. But broadly, all different skill sets are needed, especially on kind of that awareness side. That was one main takeaway I had from ETH Denver and the DeSci Summit. There's a really great conversation on how just kind of more narrative building in DeSci could really help propel the space forward. But an analogy that popped up over the past week or so as well is the idea that DeSci is a little bit more than a baby. We might be at the toddler stage now, so we have our feet starting to get under us, and really build out these rails to be able to really create the visions that we have, as well as many people throughout scientific space, open science space, fair, have had for decades and decades and have been working towards, but they didn't have the right infrastructure at that technological, financial, and social layer to effectively make happen. And now we do.
That's super exciting. I know I came to the DSci Summit as a full normie, and I definitely felt like I was at the beginning stages of something. I think somebody alluded to this being sort of like, 2011 era Bitcoin. So super exciting.
It's super exciting time. Yeah.
Sure. So okay, let's help build a narrative for the normies. What kind of resources can people like me go and check out to learn more about the space and get excited?
Definitely. A little bit biased, but last summer I worked with a couple other people in the space to write up a DeSci landscape analysis, and it gives a pretty good analysis through some surveying we did of the ecosystem and kind of where a lot of the grassroots DeSci organizations got their first community support as well as financial support was through a Gitcoin round, which is a really great way to raise funds, especially for public goods efforts, which some of DeSci is building in as well. The other half of DeSci being very VC backable ventures. And so it's kind of pursuing both sides of that throughout the ecosystem. So I'd point people to that Mirror article, and then we have a bunch of resources listed down at the bottom. The DSci Summit and a bunch of these different workshops, like at SciOS and Oranova, those were all recorded. There have been a bunch of other incredible DSci events over the past couple of years since it's really come into existence. And just searching like DSci conference on YouTube should bring you to the DSci Boston, the DSci Berlin, DSci SF, like all of these different spaces to be able to learn how it might be evolving over time. Also, a very open invitation to anyone who's remotely curious or interested in DSci, whether for themselves, for a friend, if they're on that tech side, the scientist side, the funding side, or like the citizen scientist passionate about having positive impact on the world. I'm happy to help connect you into the ecosystem and really point you in whatever direction might be most aligned. I've worked with a lot of the different DSci companies and DAOs over the course of the past few years, so can probably connect people in fairly effectively. And then through this DSci research, DSci landscape analysis, Muse Matrix, and a broader DSci onboarding campaign I'll be launching soon. I have a pretty good scope of the space.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to post event details about that. And then I gotta nag you one final time about Vitalia. Best party of Vitalia.
Yeah, there were a couple of great parties. I'm actually up here in Breckenridge with the Black Ravers right now, which I met there, and they throw good parties. So if you're in the Web3 ecosystem and looking for a good partying community to get involved with, definitely find that group. Those parties were held at the Bitcoin Center in Prospera, which is actually doing a great job of onboarding the local Honduran community into crypto. And they've really gone through this interesting kind of evolution of going from being unbanked to just like not even having bank accounts to straight into crypto. And it's creating all these incredible economic opportunities for communities like that as well. So yeah, really kind of overall great time at Vitalia and kind of covered the full spectrum of experiences people might want there.
Awesome. Shout out to Block Ravers. Catch them hopefully in a city near you. Are they touring the country, touring the world?
They have presence at a good number of the different Web3 events. I know they'll definitely be around kind of the DevCon Southeast Asia circuit in the fall as well, and have some interesting things in the works that people should definitely follow along with to come be a part of.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Erin. I know this the ETHChicago community is excited to see you again in Chicago and help propel the Midwest to the heights of all these exciting startup city innovations.
Yeah, it's super exciting. We had like 70 people in our ETHChicago Go See ETH Denver Telegram chat. So there's such a great community blossoming in the Midwest to really kind of be part of building out these different future states. And I'm super excited for what that will look like and being able to be a part of it as well.
Awesome.